Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to Ramacrow. It's time for another voicemail. Today's voicemail is from Gareth. Let's listen to what Gareth has to say.
Hi Lloyd, Gareth here from Wales, UK. Feel free to use this message. I was just wondering, you've talked a lot about how the governing body, through their broadcasts, have said we're in the final part of the last days of the last days of the final chapter and so on. I'm just wondering at this point, do you think the governing bodies themselves, the governing body members, believe in the religion or believe that this is the truth? At this point, are they just trying to convince themselves? Are they in la la land? Are they in denial? Um, have they just convinced themselves that they have to believe this? And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on whether at this point, so far into the last days, the apparent last days, do they themselves believe what they're saying? Because if they didn't, could they really continue to do what they do? Um, I suppose they could, and they would feel they'd have to anyway, whether they believe it or not. I'd love to get your opinion on that. Also, big fan of the book, nearly finished it. I have doodled all over it as a force of habit from the Watchtower days. I left the organization 11 years ago, never looked back. Keep doing what you're doing. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, Gareth. That was a really sweet message. Especially appreciate the love for my book, The Reluctant Apostate. Actually, let me plug it because it is my channel after all. Here is my book, The Reluctant Apostate. If you haven't yet read it, it's available on Amazon. So, yes. And there will be a second edition coming out at some point. But you raise a really good question, which I think I have actually sort of dealt with before, but maybe it's useful to revisit it from time to time. Are the governing body members individually believers? Are they trying to convince themselves? Or are they, I guess, entirely cynical and they're running a scam and a racket? And, my position has always been, a bit of both. I think it's worthwhile remembering, though, that as of now, there are 10 governing body members, because obviously 2 more were recently appointed, Winder and Flegel. And so, yeah, we now have 10 individuals. And if I had to guess, they will all have different attitudes and different levels of devotion or religious sentiment, call it what you will, person to person. In other words, it's not like they're all exactly identical. It's completely conceivable to me that some are more cynical than others, and that at least some, if you were to kind of put a dial on it, the dial would lean more towards, sincere belief, at least with some of them. I'm thinking about characters like Stephen Lett, who, let's face it, that's kind of the example you were giving when we're talking about proclaiming that we're in the last of the last days. He clearly got ahead of himself when he was responding to the COVID pandemic. He clearly invited this idea that the pandemic itself was a sign that we were right at the end, and immediately leapt on the pandemic as an opportunity to push that narrative. And he must regret doing that now. I mean, if he doesn't regret it, then I don't know. He really must have a screw loose. But I think that to some extent, at least some of the governing body members have bought into their own BS. You have to remember they're in this hermetically sealed environment where they don't have to or never encounter any criticism of their authority. Every corridor they walk down, every room they walk into, they are greeted by, if not devoted, doting followers, then at least people who shower them with respect and, if not adulation, and who will bend to their every whim. So they are not like normal people. They don't live normal lives. It's not a healthy environment either to be in that situation where you're completely surrounded by people who think you're absolutely amazing and who never ever question your ideas or never question your authority, and who assume that you are part of a channel with God himself. If you are in that position 24/7, 365 days a year, it's going to have an effect on you. You are going to start to believe it yourself because you're surrounded by people who are telling you it all the time. And the longer you've been a governing body member, I'm thinking the likes of Stephen Lett and Tony Morris, kind of the longer serving governing body members in particular, the longer you've been on the receiving end of that sort of treatment, the more you are going to start to believe the fantasy that's expected of you, that you are required to trot out at every opportunity. So it wouldn't surprise me if the dial, if again we're imagining a dial where on one side it's genuine delusion, and on the other side it's skepticism. It wouldn't surprise me if the dial towards genuine delusion goes more in that direction for the older members, and perhaps for the newer members who have more recently been appointed due to their ability to say yes to anything, and due to their ability to spend time in the service department and see the organization at its very worst and be fine with it. And so far, that's the case with all of the governing body members, apart from one of the recent appointees. They've all spent time in the service department. And for me, in order to be exposed to the full horror of what the organization is doing, and bear in mind, we know only the tip of the iceberg. We know only we're acting on breadcrumbs compared to what's really going on. For everything that we talk about on YouTube, and for everything we read about in the newspapers, you can bet it's 100 times worse in real life, because we're never going to hear the full horror of it, are we? But these individuals do hear those stories. And they do see the hypocrisy on a day-to-day basis, and they're still okay with it. And I think that you do need to have probably a higher level of cynicism, certainly in your early days of being a governing body member. And probably the more time passes, the more you start to believe the fantasy that you're again expected to trot out at every opportunity. That's kind of my take on it. I don't think it's a black and white, they're cynical or they're deluded. I think that there's a spectrum in between. That's why we have cognitive dissonance. And I also think that not only is there a spectrum of belief versus cynicism individually, I also think there's a spectrum within the governing body, so that you can have some members who are more believing and who are more buying into the fantasy, and other members who know that it's a scam and they're only looking out for number one. They see an opportunity to wield power, and because they are narcissists, they are grabbing at that opportunity with both hands. That's how I see things, and I hope you found my answer interesting. If you would like to leave a voicemail, the thing to do is go to speakpipe.com/Cedars, remembering to indicate clearly if you don't want me to broadcast your message on this channel. But that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching.